Okay, so one last thing we're going to mention here is shadows. So basically we have composited these images into our picture, but they just look like they're floating in midair. So what we're going to do is just briefly talk about how we can start to add some shadow underneath Stay Puft here. So we're going to close off our helicopter layer and we're going to add a new layer which we're going to drag and drop below Stay Puft. So on this layer we're going to be using the brush tools, and we're going to be using quite a soft brush. So if we right click, soften that brush off, and we're going to be using a brush with quite a low opacity, somewhere between 20 and 50%. So if we increase the size of our brush here, and I'm just going to zoom in here a little bit, then we can start to kind of paint in some shadows, and you can see with the softer brush you start to get some nice detail flowing through. Okay, and then when you're using the eraser to kind of take away some of that shadow so that it's a little bit more realistic here, then we can drop the opacity of the eraser just so that when we're eating away at some parts of the shadow here, we're not taking away the whole shadow. So work with the brush tool, start to work close in here to add in the kind of darker areas of shadow, and then increase the brush size as you kind of move it out. You can also, if you want to, use a little bit of blur as you're working up these shadow layers. If you go to Filter, Blur and Gaussian Blur, we can add in, if we just move down here, and we can add in a little bit of blur. Okay, so you can see just by blurring it off, I'm softening up that shadow and letting it spread out a bit more. And then I would maybe do that once or twice and then come back in and just build in some of the closer detailed shadow. Okay, and then one thing I can do as well, once I've got my shadow as I want it, is I can just drop the opacity of that shadow layer. Okay, so I can let through a bit more of that background layer. So don't be afraid to go too dark. You can still then composite it onto the background layer and keep working up your shadows until you're happy with it.